Imagine that you're 100 years old, and for just one day, you get to time travel and go back in time to today. How might the lens that you see life through change, and how might you show up differently? If you're a wife who struggles with feeling resentful and frustrated and angry towards your husband, or find that you show up differently outside of the house than you do inside the house, then I'm going to show you 3 steps that helped me to create a marriage that was my soft place to land, where I feel calm and peaceful and supported. And these 3 steps will help you to do the same. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Laura Amador, and I'm a relationship coach for wives. And I'm so glad that you're here. So, I think that this is really common that wives and uh, women in general and mothers, we might feel that we show up one way out in the world and then feel really guilty and confused and frustrated with ourselves that we can't be the same person at home. Because let's say outside, it feels easier to smile and to be friendly to strangers and to show up as our best selves, to be professional and warm and friendly and patient. And for some reason, the moment we walk through the door, it's like all of that patience and warmth and friendliness kind of starts to fall away. And we feel resentful or angry. And not necessarily all the time, but maybe you can relate to just feeling this sometimes and wondering, wow, I was in such a good mood 5 minutes ago when I was out food shopping or running errands or at work, why the moment I walk through the door, I feel stressed and overstimulated and frustrated and resentful and angry. And then, of course, that feeds the cycle where then you're feeling guilty and beating yourself up and wondering, what is wrong with me? And how can I fix myself? Let me start by saying that nothing is wrong with you. It's incredibly common. I speak to a lot of wives that go through the same thing, and I can say for myself that I have experienced that as well. In fact, I remember the day that I was really struggling with feeling very just resentful and angry. And also, this is the day that things changed for me. So back when I had this experience, I was working very long shifts as a dental hygienist. So it was a 1 hour commute to get there, starting there. So it was a long commute. And then I would get there and it was about a 10 to 12 hour shift. And I had back to back patients, doing cleanings. So my body was in these strenuous, awkward positions. So my neck and my shoulders often hurt, and I had carpal tunnel. And some patients were afraid of being there. They had previous bad experiences. So some people are just afraid of the dentist, and some people are just unhappy to be there, or it's just they don't want to be there, understandably, right? So sometimes we would get people who were not very happy, and still, I was able to navigate that with grace, with ease, with so much patience. I was friendly and professional. And so on this particular day, it had been a long day. It was a 10-hour shift. I had driven home the hour commute through so much traffic. And I walked through the door. I was up until then, yeah, I was tired, but it was okay. I had helped patients figure out why their insurance hadn't covered. And, I had a patient who was pretty angry about that. And still I was very patient. I kept my cool. I helped them solve the problem and no problem, just on to the next thing. And even though I was tired, absolutely, I was drained, but I was emotionally okay. I was still able to show up as my best self. So, why, oh, why? I could not understand why the moment I walked through the door and I saw that the house was messy and the kids were bouncing off the walls, I just felt this low level simmer of just frustration and anger and resentment happening just below the surface. And I remember my husband looking at me, and he knows me so well, he could tell that I don't know, a look in my eye or something in my face. I hadn't even said a word yet. And he was just like, okay. I'm just, and at the time we were passing ships in the night. He would stay with the kids during the day, and then I would work during the day and we'd switch off. So we were literally passing ships in the night. So, he just greeted me and said, dinner's on the stove, and then whoop, off to work, evading me and escaping the risk of scorn from me, because he could just tell that I was on edge and really close to losing my patience. And he was absolutely right. I was. And oh my goodness. I mean, when I say the house was turned upside down, it was, I mean, literally there was strawberries smeared. There were like new crayon scribbles on the wall and cereal, you know, just paths of cereal, trails of cereal. I mean, uh, it was like Hansel and Gretel, right? Just trails of cereal all over the house. And oh my goodness, I was just like, are you kidding me? Now I have to put everything back together and I'm already tired. This is the last thing I wanted to do. And obviously, every frustrated, angry person needs somebody to scapegoat, right? Someone to blame. And the most obvious person was my husband, obviously. This is all his fault. He had watched the kids all day. He should have made sure that the house was tidy before I got home, and um, on and on and on, and made sure that the kids weren't bouncing off the walls, right? Now, of course, if it were flipped, and my husband was walking through the door and the house was a mess and the kids were bouncing off the walls. First of all, he would never be frustrated about that because he's just cool as a cucumber. But secondly, I would be so hurt if he started judging me for that. Like, I'm a mere mortal woman and I can't have everything perfect all the time. And so I realize now, right, that I was not giving him grace. I was not seeing that actually it's a lot of work to be with the kids all day long and to keep them fed and healthy, right? But whatever, I was too tired. At the time, I did not have it in me to have grace or compassion. All I knew was that I was tired, the house was a mess, the kids were bouncing off the walls, and he was to blame, or at least that's what I thought at the time, right? And so, because he was to blame, he would get the brunt of my negative energy. I wasn't necessarily saying anything, but I was definitely a porcupine wife in the moment. Like, basically had my teeth bared, like about to hiss, that type of energy, right? And he could tell. He's so good at reading my energy that he was just like, you know what? I think it might be a good day to go into work 5 minutes early. So he just avoided me. And the thing is that this was a pretty consistent thing, that I would be so frustrated that at work, I can be so patient. I could be eternally patient and friendly and happy and warm, but at home, it just it melted away within a second. At home, I was just cranky and on edge and had no patience whatsoever. It was like just one more thing that happened would send me over the edge. And on this particular day, of course, that's exactly what happened. I was serving the stew that my husband had made for dinner, which was really delicious because he's a great cook. But still, that wasn't enough to get me out of my cranky mood. I was serving the stew, and we were sitting at the kitchen table, and of course, my son hit his bowl with the elbow and sent it crashing down onto the floor. And so I was like, oh, one more thing, like as if I didn't have enough to clean up. There's one more thing. And so, I basically like quietly growled and was like, oh. And so now my husband had experienced a porcupine wife, and now my kids were experiencing a porcupine mom. And it just was not a very pleasant, warm place to be. And, the easy thing, or the my first instinct would usually be to point fingers, like, whose fault is it here? But in my experience, that's not very helpful or effective, and definitely not conducive to connection. But that's what I was doing for sure. I was looking at, okay, again, who's to blame? My husband at this point wasn't even home, but still, it was like one more thing. He made, of all things he could have made, he made stew. And stew is so messy to clean up when it's smeared all over the floor, right? So it was just like one more thing that I could be angry and resentful for. Because at this point, it was like throwing things in the garbage disposal, right? Just all of my resentment was flying towards him because, yeah, he's the easiest scapegoat that was around, right? And so, anyways, it was these cycles of just anger, so much anger. And then, of course, once that anger kind of calmed down and simmered, um, and melted away, and I could reflect, then it was just incredible guilt. Why am I always so on edge? And why can't I be more patient? And what is wrong with me? And so that's where I was stuck. And so what I realized was that the most important thing, as I was sitting there, mopping up my son's stew and literally asking myself, had this happened at work, I would have been like, it's okay, don't worry, I've got it. And I would have internally, not just externally, been fine, I would have emotionally, internally been okay too. Why at home did everything feel like such a big deal? And so that was the first thing. I really needed to name how I felt in the moment, to just give myself that grace that, you know what, I feel frustrated right now, and that's okay. That's okay. I don't know why yet. I didn't know why there was such a mismatch between the woman I showed up as and felt at work versus the woman I showed up as and felt at home. But I didn't need to know that yet. The first thing was I needed to just give myself the grace and identify how I felt. Like, just give myself that moment to feel what I felt and to be okay with it. And so just telling myself, you know what, I'm frustrated, and that's okay. I didn't need to go further from there for the moment. I didn't need to blame or point fingers or get angry at myself for being angry or get angry at my husband for cooking stew, right? Just nothing more than that. For the moment, it was just, how do I feel? I feel overwhelmed. I feel overstimulated. And it's okay. That's how I feel. I'm allowed to feel that. So that was the first thing. And that part is so powerful. And that's the first thing I would invite you to is to just not beat yourself up and not need to point fingers for the moment, because this part isn't about fixing. It's about giving yourself grace and knowing that once you know how you feel, you will have the power to create what you want to experience. So this part cannot be bypassed. We have to know how you feel first. You have to know how you feel and to be okay with that just for the moment so that you can go forward and create what you want to experience next. Now we go on to the next part. And that is, well, let me start by saying that my biggest mistake and why this was a continual experience that I had day after day after day, that I would walk through the door and feel angry and frustrated and resentful, was that I didn't have a vision. I did not have a clear vision for what I wanted things to look like. I knew very clearly what I did not want, but that's not enough. That's not a vision. I needed a vision of what I did want. And furthermore, a vision of what I could create, that I had control over. Again, it comes back to this principle that I cannot control anyone outside of myself. I cannot control my husband. I could ask him to try to tidy things up before I got home, but I couldn't control him and make sure that he did. I certainly couldn't control my children. I could set rules and tell them do this, do that, which is exhausting in and of itself. But I couldn't go into their little bodies and make them be calm and quiet, right? I couldn't control anyone else but myself. And so really this was about Creating my vision was about reclaiming my agency. Because so often we get lost in being frustrated about the things that we cannot control when completely bypassing our own place of power. What can we control? And what of that I can control can contribute to how I do want to feel and what I do want to experience. And so once I started asking myself that question, like, what do I want to experience? What is my vision? I started to really understand, okay, maybe it's not so much about the house being a huge mess or anything like that. That's what I don't want. What I did want was I wanted to feel like I could just relax and breathe at home. I wanted to feel calm and peaceful. I wanted to reconnect with my family. Comes back to that quote that I opened with, which is actually a piece of wisdom that one of my dearest, oldest, wisest patients shared with me. She told me, whenever I feel over, she told me back when she was a young mother, that whenever she felt overwhelmed or overstimulated, she would imagine herself as an old woman at 100 years old and think back and imagine that she could time travel back to today and she would see her life through this new lens of, wow, how lucky am I? How beautiful, even if things are chaotic and messy, how lucky am I? And her telling me this now as an old lady really added a layer of perspective of, wow, it's true. As chaotic and messy as these days are, I am absolutely going to miss it someday. For sure, I am going to miss it. And so, really getting in touch with, okay, so what do I want to experience? I was able to really zoom into, yes, what I want deep underneath everything, even more than a nice, clean house. Why do I want the nice, clean house? I want it because I want to feel calm and peaceful. And underneath that, even more, my deepest desire was to feel connected to my family. And so once I knew that, once I knew how I felt and how I wanted to feel, we could get to the really fun part, which is creating that vision from what I did have control over. And so it was really this shifting from expectation into vision. Expectation is what I want other people to do or what I think things should look like so that I can be happy. I've heard it said, and I can't remember who said this or where this idea came from, but this idea that expectations are contracts that we make with ourselves to be unhappy until something happens. And so that's exactly what it was. I was in this contract with myself that I would not be happy at home unless my husband did what I thought he should do and my kids acted the way I thought that they should. What a miserable contract to be in. And really, it's a lose-lose situation. I lose because then I'm miserable, and my family loses because they get to experience my misery, right? So, terrible contract to be in. So, I had to break that contract and say, okay, what do I want to experience, and how can I create that experience for myself? And here's the thing, right? You don't need to control circumstances outside of your control in order to be happy, right? You need to, it's reclaiming your agency and the very important responsibility that we all have to make ourselves happy, to be the best version of ourselves for our family as well, including our husband and friends and kids and et cetera, who else and whoever else that you love and is really important to you. So, what if your resentment isn't necessarily coming from what your husband does or doesn't do, but from the meaning that you're attaching to that? Let me explain what I mean. You know how I mentioned that at home, excuse me, at work, I was able to handle disgruntled patients with ease and to, if I remember one of my colleagues put her soup in the microwave at lunch one day. And I don't know if she had tinfoil over or what happened, but it exploded. It got everywhere. And I walked in at like the perfect timing, right as the explosion was happening. And it was kind of dangerous actually, like there was fire coming out of it. But anyways, I walked in and I helped her, and we got everything all cleaned up, and I was happy to help. No problem. Yeah, I'm so glad I walked in when I did because I could help you, right? What was the difference there between then my son who accidentally elbowed his soup and it splashed all over the floor, and then I was like, oh, seriously, another thing to clean up, right? Why? What was the difference? The difference, I believe, was the meaning that I was attaching and that contract that I just talked about, right? The expectations. But let's talk about the meaning here that's being attached. When I make everything personal, it's going to be way harder to handle than if it's not personal. At work, I could take things just for a fact. My colleague exploded her soup. I'm here. Of course, I'm going to help her. No problem. Problem solved. Now we can move on with our day. At home, it was, oh, I'm the meaning I was attaching, right? I walked through the door. The house is a mess. My husband didn't clean it because he doesn't care. He wasn't thoughtful. He doesn't care that I'm gonna have to do this. He, right? I made it all about him and all about what that meant about him towards me. It became this whole thing, this whole narrative, and a very negative narrative, by the way, and one that was harmful and hurtful because it made me feel angry towards him. It made me feel resentful towards him. When really, if I had just backed away and not looked at it as something personal, something that he did on purpose, or even because he didn't care, right? Whatever meaning I was attaching, if I could just look back and just look at the facts without putting personal mush in there, then I could just say, okay, the house is messy. They must have had a busy day, or or even without having to go there, but I could give him the benefit of the doubt. Right? I could give him grace and compassion. But even if I wasn't going to do that, if I just said, okay, the house is messy right now, it is what it is. Sometimes it's messy when I'm watching the kids too, and when I say sometimes, I mean usually. But if I just said, okay, it is what it is, how are we going to move forward from this? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Maybe that means, um, you know what? I really want to go for a family walk right now and put the kids in the carriage and the dog on the leash, and let's get out of here, and we'll take care of that later. Or maybe it means, yeah, you know what? Let's get in a little elbow grease and some teamwork and get this place cleaned up, right? What a joyful difference. What a huge difference if I could do that, right? And so as I really got in touch with that and realized, oh yeah, like at work, it wouldn't, and I'm using work as an example because this is where I had my breakthrough, but it could be anywhere, right? Maybe you're really friendly and the strangers get the best version of you, and your husband gets like the prickly version of you, right? So when I could just say, okay, this is what it is, this is the situation, I'm not going to make it personal. What do I want to do about it? What, how do I want to show up in this situation? And so in that moment, I realized, um, what I really want is I want to have dinner outside. At this point, I'd mopped up the kids' soup. I was like, you know what? Let's finish our dinner outside where I don't have to look at this mess. So we went out and sat by the picnic table. And then once I was fed and nourished and feeling better and had some water, I was like, okay, you know what? I think I would love to come home to a tidy house. But just like I was able to approach it in a really positive way when my colleague exploded her soup, I wanted to bring that same energy to my home in the moment. And so I said, you know what? Let's have a little cleaning party. I'll set the timer for 15 minutes. I'm going to put on some really fun music and let's see how much we can get done in 15 minutes. And the kids were like, yeah, party, let's make a race. And it's so funny how if you gamify things, kids think it's so much fun, right? So, anyways, we ran around for 15 minutes and surprise, surprise, the house wasn't even as messy as it looked. It took less than 15 minutes to finish tidying it. And then I was like, oh, okay, tidy space, awesome, teamwork. It was connecting, it was fun. My kids had fun with it. I had fun with it. Now what do I want? I was like, oh, I would love to just relax and read my book. And so I packed up my book and we walked down the street to the park and the kids were laughing and I was reading and then I played with them a little bit too and it was just so connecting and so calm and so peaceful and I was like, wow, what a difference when I bring that energy that I was able to bring at work to that colleague with the exploded soup and bring it to every situation. But the difference here, the big distinction was not adding meaning, not attaching meaning, not trying to translate every action that my husband did or didn't do into this big personal thing. And just recognizing it's not that he kept the house messy on purpose because he wanted to stress me out. And it's not that he's lazy. He literally just cooked a beautiful stew, right? It just is what it is. And I don't need to investigate it with a a microscope and find the emotional whys to every single thing, right? Just no more attaching meaning. It is what it is. What do I want to do with it about it? And how do I want to experience it? That was my ticket to freedom from my own contract that I'm going to be miserable until my husband does what I think he should do and my kids act the way I think that they should act, right? In other words, it freed me from expectations. It freed me from being angry and resentful and miserable all the time. So let's get into the third part because that was the vision, right? Creating the vision. The third part is seeing things through a different lens. So I imagine that if I had been 100 years old and time traveled back to that day and time when I was walking through the door and finding that disaster, that I would have seen things very differently. Instead of looking at, oh, the house is messy because he didn't care, right? I would have been able to see, oh, okay, the house is messy and the kids, they were covered in like dirt from head to toe, right? Like not just the house is messy, the kids were messy. They had like strawberry juice all over their chins. And it's like, okay, yeah, I could look at the house is messy and the kids are messy, or I could look at the fact that the kids have dirt on their feet because they were running in the backyard barefoot, helping my husband garden. And they have strawberry juice all over their face because they were eating the strawberries that my husband planted and that are now uh, growing and blooming. Uh, I could look at, oh, the house is messy because he doesn't care, or look at, oh, they spent the whole day outside tending to the garden. The kids were in the sunshine and fresh air, exercising and playing. And my husband cooked a beautiful meal so that I could eat dinner as soon as I got home. The kids were well loved, well taken care of, safe, happy, having a blast, hence them bouncing off the walls. Uh, but really, like, wow, how amazing. When I was able to look through that lens and replace my expectations with gratitude and instead of looking at everything that wasn't, looking at everything that was, wow, all of a sudden there was an abundance of things to be grateful for and happy about. And yeah, it's still usually not necessarily a fun thing to walk into a messy house, but would I trade that? Would I trade, like, if my husband became a drill sergeant and was making sure the house was perfectly in order and the kids were perfectly tidy and clean, and and instead of playing outside, they just stayed inside and I don't know, practiced math, then would I trade that for what I had? No, of course not. I would much rather have the kids running outside, wild, playing with strawberry juice dripping down their chins. And I had my husband to be grateful for that. And all of a sudden, I felt that resentment melt away and be replaced with immense gratitude. And I continued to think that evening as, I bathed the kids, I put them to bed, I just continued to think about all of the amazing things that my husband did and does to support me, to support our family, to make sure that our family is a safe and warm and happy place. And really, I was the only one getting in the way of my happiness by looking at the choosing to look at what I thought was lacking, when really, no, our home can be messy and chaotic sometimes, but that's just because it's well lived in and well loved. And so that evening when my husband came home, I was able to greet him with just so much gratitude in my heart. And it's crazy how our energy precedes us, right? Human beings, we are energetic creatures. We can somehow sense how other people are feeling. And especially if you know that person really well, like your spouse or your husband. My husband can absolutely sense when I am a prickly, resentful porcupine and when I am grateful and warm and happy. And so that evening, I received him with so much gratitude in my heart, and I just felt so connected to him. And I just noticed in him how before he had basically run away to work. And now he just like took this deep exhale, like, oh, thank goodness she's in a good mood. But also like, oh, I'm home. Right. And since then, I've really made it a point to choose really intentionally and carefully what I'm focusing on and the lens that I'm seeing things through. And I find that whenever I choose to see things through a lens of gratitude instead of expectations, and also reclaiming my own agency and, okay, what do I want to experience and how can I create that? How can I create that for myself? Right? Those three things have created this experience in my marriage where my marriage really is this beautiful, safe space to land for both of us, where I can just come to exhale, to be myself, to feel loved and supported and accepted, and and I strive every day to create that for him as well. And it has been immensely beautiful to experience, but I think also immensely beneficial for our home as a whole. That it feels really safe and warm and welcoming to all of us. So, all that to say, you do not need a different husband. You don't need him to change. Although, in my experience, once I changed what I focused on, like he became that much more, his hero gene was ignited. He became that much more happy to find ways to make me happy once he realized that actually he really could, that I wasn't this prickly porcupine all the time, right? So once I stopped being upset about the messy house and started doing cleaning parties, and my husband adopted the cleaning party thing, and it became more and more often that I was coming into actually a pretty tidy space, which was an added bonus, an added benefit to everything. It wasn't initially the point, but it ended up being a byproduct of being joyful and being in this really grateful place. And so you don't need your marriage to completely turn around or your husband to completely change or anything like that. In my experience, to start experiencing more peace and calm and joy within your home, you can start by first just identifying what you feel, giving yourself permission to feel what you feel for a moment and being okay, just giving yourself that grace, not beating yourself up over it, not feeling guilty and being stuck in this guilt cycle of now I'm angry, now I'm guilty, now I'm angry, now I'm guilty, right? But just giving yourself permission to be a mere mortal woman who feels what she feels right now. You're not alone, and it's okay. Next, asking yourself, what do you want to experience? And how can you create that for yourself? That's really reclaiming your agency and your power. And you're actually much more powerful than you might think. And thirdly, choosing what you focus on with intention. So instead of looking at things from a place of anger or lack, or again, attaching meaning to things, attaching meaning like, oh, he didn't do this because he doesn't care. He didn't do that because he's lazy, or whatever it is for you, right? Just letting go of needing to attach meaning to everything, and instead looking at the positive. What is good in your marriage? What are some beautiful ways that your husband is supportive of you, or trying to make you happy? I bet if you start looking, you might find some that otherwise you might be missing. And in my experience, sometimes the very life that you are trying desperately to change because of expectations or frustration might be the exact life that someday you'll wish that you could come back to. Now, thank you so much for tuning in. If this resonated with you and you are a wife who does struggle with feeling resentful and angry, and you would love to create a marriage that feels really warm and loving and caring and supportive, where you can feel really peaceful and calm, I do offer private coaching. So the link to the description to learn more about that, you'll find the link, in the description. And if you're not ready for that, but you do want to create more connection in your marriage, I also have a free guide called 3 Steps to Reignite Connection. You'll find the link to that also in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, keep softening into love. Bye bye.